In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. This podcast is not just about dissecting topics from two different perspectives. It's also about how to have conversations on difficult topics while avoiding the urge to tear someone's head off and vomit down the bloody stump of their neck.
Taxes.
Taxes. Who wants to talk about taxes?
Yeah, I think the only time people want to talk about taxes is when they can argue about it. Otherwise, who wants to? So, you had mentioned that there's a couple topics, and we may expand this beyond just this one because I think they're worth covering. As of course you do as well, since you brought it up. And the first one I think was an interesting idea. And why don't you start up? Why don't you lay the groundwork for the first portion of the conversation?
Okay, so the first thing it seems like a lot of the discussions that we have about taxes revolve around, or people don't realize that they're kind of trying to define what is the purpose of what's the purpose of taxing the populace? Obviously, it's to fund the government, but it does seem that people often are taking it a step further and saying that it's for redistribution of wealth. In fact, Bernie Sanders, I looked up something. Bernie Sanders, on his website, it says, in order to reduce the outrageous level of inequality that exists in America today, and to rebuild the disappearing middle class, we must establish an annual tax on the extreme wealth of the top 0.1%. I think Joe Biden has made comments in that regard. Elizabeth Warren, obviously. And some people on the other side of the aisle are fighting hard against that and saying that, it's not your job to do that, or who are we going to tax? But I think we should at least spend some time discussing what the purpose of taxation is, and should it include an effort to take money from some people and give it to other people. Now, and I'm not talking here, I think we all agree, if there's people that are really poor, or they've suffered some disastrous disease, Medicaid steps in, like nobody's talking about doing away with that. But if we say, for example, well, there's people at the top, like a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk or Bill Gates or Brian Davis, any of those people, do we want to take some of their money because they're making too much and give it to somebody else? And not just, take it from kind of everybody proportionally, or how should we say, or progressively, and give it to the poorest that really need it, but also take it away from them because they have too much. So I wanted to discuss that for a while. I don't know what your thoughts are on that topic.
Well, yeah, I think it is interesting, and I've heard a few people mention about of course, there's two sides to this action they're discussing. One is to remove from some people, and the other is to give that what they just removed to others. And everyone seems to agree that, or not everyone that is of this mindset says, yes, we should take money from the uber wealthy, from the super wealthy, and redistribute it. But I haven't really heard anybody, and maybe you have, how this distribution of these funds would go about. Have you heard any plan in that regard?
No, all you really hear is, I guess to some degree, I think for the most part what you hear is, listen, there are super wealthy people. They don't deserve it. You and I were talking the other day. It didn't seem like you follow Saturday Night Live, which I don't typically very much either, but I do tend to follow Elon Musk. And when he was hosting Saturday Night Live, there was a lot of pushback from some of the cast. They were upset that they had invited him to be on the show. And I was really surprised, but they feel like he's an evil person, like he has too much money. And Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, I've heard them talk about doing away with billionaires. These people just have too much. So you hear more about that, hey, these people have too much, let's take it from them. And then it's not like, well, we're going to take X amount and give it X amount in this form. But there is certainly a lot of talk about, well, then if we did that, then we could, forgive all student loan debt, or we could, ensure that everybody has enough food to eat or can go to, whatever. I don't know what the promises that they come up with. So it's not a specific plan, but there certainly is a lot of talk of they have so much, let's take it from them. Oh, and I've got all these cool programs that are going to help people out.
Yeah. Well, and the reason why I ask is because you had mentioned as you were opening up this segment that there is a portion of the population that's sort of exempt from the conversation. Those that are really struggling, those that are below a certain threshold, that maybe can't even get their children three regular meals a day, and so we exempt them. And so when we talk about this redistribution of wealth, is this something where everybody would benefit to a degree, or we're going to target it to certain people, or we're going to target it to certain pet projects like education and something like that, where not everybody would benefit, only those that are getting that education would benefit. And so I think from what I've heard, all these people that are upset that there's that there is a small portion of the population that has a large amount of wealth, they seem to focus on the removal of that wealth and don't pay too much attention on what they're going to do once they have grabbed this wealth. And I guess I'm sure from your perspective, it doesn't matter. The crime is the taking of the money, not not what happens with it afterwards. Which I can understand that perspective, but I think part of the motivation of this conversation that they're having is, as you and I touched briefly on, that there are some people that are not paying a proportional amount of their income to the government in taxes, because they earn income in different ways. And so I don't know. What I've heard from the times I've heard it, they seem to look at a certain economic threshold. If you have a certain amount of money, then it'll trigger one of these events if that's what's going to happen. And I think that may be a way to, I guess, make up for the inequality in what they feel is the taxation, not just in terms of the income.
Well, I mean, that's a friendly way to phrase it, but I mean, that is, if people aren't paying the correct amount in taxes, we should change the tax code. Mm-hmm. That's different than redistributing wealth and saying, well, listen, this person has too much, so I'm going to give it to somebody else. We've decided that we don't and one of the concerns, I mean, aside from the fact that you're thinking to yourself, I mean, sometimes it's so easy just to say, well, that's not constitutional. It's not in the Constitution. And you're thinking, well, I mean, we gave them a lot of powers, I guess. I don't know. But to some degree, in this regard, I'd say, yeah, I don't think the Constitution was set up so that we could take money from one group of people because they have too much and give it to another. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with the idea of, listen, there's people that don't have enough to survive because of some extreme circumstances, but just saying, well, this person has too much, so I'm going to take and give to somebody else. I have a real problem with that, which is different than, kind of what you were talking about. But then the other thing I'd say is, I mean, what's the justification for it? Are we saying, for example, even Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, are we saying, or, maybe somebody even that's gotten it, maybe not in the same way that just inherited it. Are we saying then, well, what's the justification? Have they done something illegal? Or are we just saying, well, I don't like that they have so much, so I want to take some of it and give it to somebody else? And I think that's a real difficult argument to make to some people in the population, at least, to say, yeah, you can't pass it on to your kids. You can't earn too much. We're just going to take it from you. I just don't understand that argument.
Do you have any idea about, if we take, let's say, the people that have earned their wealth in the last couple decades, like the Bill Gates, the Bezos, the Musks, do you have any idea how their wealth compares to, let's say, the early 20th, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, and that era, that ilk?
I don't know. I mean, there certainly is some talk Yeah, that would be an interesting one, because there is talk about how there has been an increase in the divide between the people that have a lot and the people that don't have that much.
Right.
But yeah, you wonder if you adjusted for inflation and everything else, what the difference really would be. I don't know. But once again, I don't care. Like you have to make first. Let's make the argument that that even matters. Like, let's say that they are more wealthy compared to the common man than John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan and John Frick and all these guys were. To me, it just doesn't matter. Just because they have a lot doesn't mean that we should say, if they've gained it illegally, then let's prosecute them.
Mm-hmm.
If they've gotten it in a way that is legal, then we can either change the law because we don't like what they did, but we should be careful about changing the law just to penalize people because they have a lot of money. I don't really have a problem with that, with somebody who has a lot of money. And I think that whole idea of just saying, well, this guy has a lot of money, I don't think he should have it, so we're going to give it to other people. And it sounds noble, but you have to, when Robin Hood in the movies and in the stories was doing it, it was because the sheriff was an evil person. But is Jeff Bezos evil? And if so, in what way? Did he just take advantage of a quirk in the system? Did he just there's definitely some luck involved with it. I mean, he came around at the right time. If he was born in the 1500s or the 900s, he probably wouldn't be so wealthy.
Right.
He was able to pull himself up so that's one thing. He was born in the right part of the world is another thing. But also, there's probably a lot more luck that he just right place, right time, happened to have an idea that just took off, and right when the internet was taking off, he decided to make it go. Like, it's a lot of it's luck. I get it, but he's a really hard worker and he's pretty intelligent. And even if it was lucky, I'm not going to take money from somebody because they were luckier than me. I don't take money from a lottery winner because they got $1 million and I didn't, even though they made a poor choice.
But the government does.
They do.
Quite a bit, in fact.
Yes, quite a bit.
Yeah.
Quite a bit. I mean, we could spend some time talking about the terrible thing that the government does with lotteries. They're the only ones that can run lotteries, and then they take all this money from poor people to do it. It's horrible.
Yeah.
But anyway, but once again, like if they win $100 million and they get to keep 50 million of it, or 30 million, or whatever they keep, I don't begrudge them that. I don't say, well, listen, you didn't earn that, so I'm going to take it from you. No, I can't do that. Why should I take it from Jeff Bezos, who actually started a business and put his money at risk, or Elon Musk, who took his money from PayPal and invested all of it in 3 different companies, and then lived on his friends' couches because he invested so much in those companies? Like, no, I don't think we should be taking money from those people. I think they should pay a normal tax rate and according to our tax code, and I don't think we should be trying to redistribute their wealth just because they've been successful, whether through luck or hard work or anything else.
Well, okay, so I'm really drawn towards moving this argument onto a different topic, but I know I don't want to do that just yet. I want to give this topic, its fair play. So I guess one of the ways that I would address it is I feel, and give me a moment, I'm going to digress and then bring it back again. One of the things that the Republicans do really, really well is marketing, in that they're able to in very few words give you an impression, an idea of something that's really hard to argue against. Conversely, the Democrats are absolutely horrible at it. They do a really poor job of trying to, in just a few words, get people excited about this program that they have in place. We talked about one last week, the Office of Disinformation. Is that what it was called? I mean, did someone actually think about this thing before they went and labeled it? And I do feel like Bernie Sanders, when he talks about his redistribution of wealth, is really talking to a very small portion of the population that resonates with that. Those that are really looking at, a strictly socialist system. And when Elizabeth Warren uses that phrasing as well, I think that it really does turn off a lot of people. But if you look at the tax system in general, it is the idea that whether you're talking a proportional system, we all give the same percentage, or progressive, where we all give different percentages, we're using this money to benefit everybody in terms of paved roads, a police force that keeps us safe, a military that keeps our borders safe. All these things that are designed, whether their money is wasted or you agree with the program, the intention is that we all benefit. And we all don't pay into the system in the same amount. It may be the same percentage, well, not in this country, but we're all paying into the system. And so, if you look at what the people that are calling for a redistribution of wealth, what they're really talking about is another tax bracket at a higher level, a pretty stiff taxation on those that are making a lot of money. And so in that regard, it's not any different than our present tax system. They're just using a really bad label for it as a way to try and motivate people. And it's not a good motivator for most people.
I don't think that's true. I mean, they're talking about a whole other, they're proposing things like a wealth tax.
Yeah.
So if you have a certain amount of wealth, that's not a different tax bracket.
Well, I mean, it kind of is.
No, it's not. Tax brackets are on income. Wealth is saying, well, listen, if you have a certain amount of wealth, we're going to say, well, we're going to take some of that money from you. And there's all sorts of problems with that. We could spend a tremendous amount of time on that. Maybe it's not worth it. But yeah, they're not just talking about a different tax bracket. Yeah, they're saying.
You're right.
And I think there's something to the motivation, Brian. Like, I mean, progressivity is understandable to some degree, but to say, well, there is a fair amount of talk. And I've even seen some polls that, a quarter of the country, some say, and some say a half the country are saying, yeah, there's too much disparity between the wealth, the haves and the have-nots. We need to take some of that money and give it to the poor. And I think what I'm trying to get to here is we should not be concerned about that. If they have done something illegal, if they have done something wrong, let's prosecute them. If they have a lot of money, I don't care if they got it from the lottery, hard work, luck, their parents, I could not care less. That's their money. If they got it legally, they get to keep it. We can't just say, well, they have too much, I'm going to take some of their money and give it to somebody else. I don't like that at all. That's my whole point with this.
And I get your point, that they didn't do anything illegal, and so they should be able to keep what they have. At the same time, our tax system, which is progressive, the more money you make, the more you're going to pay within certain brackets. And maybe you do view it the same way, which is that the more money you make, the more you're being punished because you're being taxed at a higher rate, unless of course you're making your money off of your stocks, which is a different category for whatever reason. So
we can talk about that reason in a minute.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. I have no doubt we'll get there. But if we look at it strictly from if you are correct in that they're talking about basing the taxation on wealth versus income. The idea being that if all of your money sits in one pot or in a bunch of pots, but you don't actually draw it as income, how different is it from actual income? You have someone like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos who make most of their money from stock options and from their stock holdings. So they, instead of getting a regular paycheck, they decide how much money they need that week, that month, that year, and then they go and they pull the money out. Whereas most everybody else that's on a payroll doesn't have that option to say, don't pay me my full salary, pay me a portion of it, but keep the rest of it in my stocks because I don't want to pay taxes on it. I'm going to take the benefit of what I believe the growth will be in my in the stocks over time. Now, many of them will get paid in stock options, but then there's the salary that goes along with it.
Or they have money in the stock market, or they have money in the bank. I mean, we're not taxing people's wealth. I mean, I don't know. Well, maybe we should. I mean, I think we've made some good points, some good progress on that topic. Maybe we should talk a bit about the incentives, which was the second topic that we were coming to, because I think that goes to a lot of the things that we're talking about here. And I think sometimes when we talk about taxes, people don't realize how important those incentives are. A couple of examples that I can think of is years ago, corporations, before they had, I mean, this is kind of a layman's understanding of it. So if you know better, correct me if I'm wrong, or, but my basic understanding is back, a long time ago, these corporate taxes, it was double taxation in the sense that a corporation would earn money, would be taxed on its profitability, and then would distribute money to, well, then it's going to pay money to its workers and pay money to, and then pay dividends. And those dividends were taxed again. So you had the corporation taxed on its income, and then the dividends paid out after the taxation, and then it's taxed again when the shareholders receive dividends. Mm-hmm. So a couple of ways that they've created entities to avoid that are these S-corps and LLCs that people have that are either pass-through entities. So all of the earnings of that corporation might pass through to a single shareholder if I start a business and I have an LLC, or just pass through to all of the shareholders, so that instead of the corporation being taxed, that those shareholders are taxed based on the whole corporation, but they can take the money out as they please. I don't know if I'm making sense with that, but you can see that at the very first, you can see a couple of things going on there. First, you had double taxation to these corporations because they were taxed on their income, and then the shareholders were taxed based on the dividends that they received. So that makes it not as profitable to be owning a business, even though you get some of the protection that a corporation gives you. That if the corporation is sued because something happened, you're not putting all of your assets at risk. I would imagine that I know you've run some businesses in the past, that you probably created an LLC, some sort of corporate entity,
sure,
that you have some protection so that if something went wrong and you were sued for something that maybe wasn't even your fault, but could be considered negligence, or just was something that happened while you were working, that you didn't put all of the assets that you'd worked your life to building up, you wouldn't put them all at risk. Well, there's some adverse incentives there. And then we have these weird corporate structures that people are creating, that these taxes, this methodology of taxation are creating. We talked about these investments and capital gains. Why do we tax them at different rates? Well, economists for years have been illustrating the fact that we want this sort of investment. We want people to invest in companies. We want people to invest in real estate for a number of reasons. It's interesting. You and I, you had complained in the past about trickle-down economics. A theory that you had said Republicans like Ronald Reagan and others had created this idea that there would be trickle-down economics, which, if you look into trickle-down economics, it was never actually proposed or presented by any right-leaning politician or economist. It was a caricature of what they were actually saying, of people opposing tax cuts or these programs that were being presented, to say, well, these people on, like Ronald Reagan, are proposing trickle-down economics. But he never said trickle-down economics. That was the way that the other side, his opponents, presented his ideas to try to make it sound bad. It was a caricature of his ideas. Mm-hmm. Now, what's funny about it is if you talk about lowering tax rates, especially on something like capital gains, what actually happens is the opposite. Trickle-down economics says, well, listen, if there's these people at the top that are getting these tax breaks, they're going to have more money, they're going to spend it, and then eventually it'll trickle down to the lower income people. But the opposite is true. If you have these investments and people are investing this money in, say, real estate or a business, the first thing that happens is those lower income people are the ones that benefit before anybody else. Because when you invest in that company, who has to be hired to for that investment in the company to work? Like if you have real estate, for example, and somebody invests in real estate, they have to hire construction workers, they have to hire painters, they have to hire installers, they have to hire HVAC people, all of these people. So it goes to them first, and then the investor is going to get a payback later on. But the incentive there, the reasoning behind taxing those types of activities at lower rates, we can disagree about how true this is, but the reasoning behind it is if you tax those activities at lower rates, that will promote investment in those types of activities. if, for example, you have a certain amount of investment in all of those types of activities, and then you raise the rates, let's say, before I think it was, at the highest rates, capital gains was, I think, 39%, I can't remember. And if you said, well, now it's 50%, you're going to see less investment in those types of activities. If you lower it, you're going to see more investment in those types of activities. So while it does benefit, the investors, it also benefits the economy as a whole and a lot of different people because more money is going to the economy. Is that making sense, the incentive that we see there?
It is. I don't know that I would agree with it because to my understanding, you only are taxed on your capital gains when you withdraw your investment.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as your investment stays in whatever it is you're working on, whatever you're putting the money into, there's no taxable event. So as long as you keep the money in the business, you're not taxed. It's only when you draw some out to do whatever it is you might do with it.
That's true. How is that different than anything I said?
Well, the implication that you're putting forth is that if we lower capital gains tax, there's more money to be invested. But if the money is already in there and the money is churning in the investment, it's not being taxed. It's continuing to work on whatever it's being invested in. It's only when you withdraw the money.
That's true, but people withdraw money from investments all the time. I mean, it's not like every investment, they just hold it in there. In fact, when you lower the capital gains rate, they have more of an incentive to pull it out because now they're saying, well, if I pull it out, if the capital gains rates are low, well, I can pull it out now because they're low now. They may go up later when Biden gets elected, or if Trump doesn't get reelected or whatever. You know what I mean? So and they just have to pull it out for different reasons. Sometimes they're just selling a company, or sometimes they need money for something. I mean, it's true. Yeah, it's only when it's pulled out, and I think that only makes sense. I mean, if I, for example, invested in Walmart, and let's say I bought $1,000 worth of stock, and then in 1 year it goes up to $2,000 worth of stock. Well, they're not going to tax me for that because I haven't taken the money yet. And frankly, in 6 months, it might drop again. And then I paid taxes on money that I never even got in my hand. So I'd have to come up with the money somehow and then pay it to the government and then find out, well, next year I have a refund because now the stock prices went up and down. So yeah, you don't have to pay taxes until the money is pulled out. But money is pulled out all the time. It is true that you're not taxed until it comes out of that investment, but people pull out money from capital investments all the time.
They do? Okay, so I'm going to change the conversation just a little bit. If instead of talking about a personal investment, if you have a business investment, so whether you've created an LLC and you're investing in real estate, or you've given your money to a hedge fund, and that hedge fund is buying and selling and holding onto something and getting rid of it, you don't get taxed on either of those situations until you pull the money out of the LLC and that's invested in real estate, or you pull the money out of your hedge fund that's being moved around all these times. So again, it's not, if you do it correctly, it's not a taxable event until you go to do something else with the money, whether it's spend it or put it in another investment, whether you go, to stop that activity, whatever it might be.
I'm not so sure about the hedge fund idea. You may be right, but I know with stocks, if I sell a bunch of stocks and buy bonds, or sell a bunch of stocks and buy other stocks, that is a taxable event.
It is, yeah, because you don't have it within a business. Now, I don't know, we're not going to bring an accountant to go and verify whether you and I are being fully accurate in these things. I don't know if you could, for example, create a business that its sole purpose is to go and invest in the stock market. And if you keep all of your investments within this LLC and you don't draw any money out, I don't know if there'd be any taxable events. I do have an LLC.
There would be.
What's that?
There would be taxable events.
But even if you don't take the money out, even if you just.
Yeah, because when stocks are sold, whether you own it, a business owns it, or a trust owns it, if the stocks are sold, that's a taxable event.
It totally is. It is. But I know with my business, if I keep all the profits from the construction that I do in the bank account of the business, as long as it stays in that bank account, I don't get taxed. I only get taxed on the money I take out in order for my living expenses, because that cash is still going, keeping the business going, because it's going into the next project. It's buying the materials for the next project. It's paying for the people that are working for me in the next project. It's not until I take the money out for myself that the money gets taxed. It's working capital before that point.
I don't think that's true either. Like when I am taxed based on the income of the business, and that's why, for example, depreciation is so important, because whether I pull the money out or not, I am taxed based on the profitability of the business.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get too far into this because I'm doing a whole lot of speculation and guesswork. I could imagine where, if you 1 year where the business operates at a loss because you've taken all that money that you've put it in different projects here and there. The next year it operates at a huge profit because all those investments come to fruition, and they still stay within the business, and so it'd be fluctuating all over the place. So I really can't say. To me, it seems like that neither one of those would be like a high tax year and then a zero tax year, because they're still, within the operating budget of the business itself. But like I said, I'm not really 100% sure how all that works. But I do want to show you, and just so you know, we're at 9 minutes right now. Is this it? Okay, so this is a graph of the adjusted for inflation, the tax rates given the amount of money that an individual makes, and it spans from 1913 all the way up to 2000, I don't know, 10 or 12 or something like that. And the reason why this is so interesting is that by many accounts, the strongest economic era of the country was right after World War II, the 50s and into the early 60s. And if you look at the graph, the highest tax rates for an individual with $1 million is during that era, the end of the 40s and on into the 50s, and then it drops a whole lot. And the reason why I find this so interesting is that the period of greatest economic prosperity is when the tax rates were the highest across the board, but in particular for those with the most money. There you've got at one point there was a 90% tax rate for people that had $1 million, or I don't know if that's had, or I guess they would be claiming $1 million of income for the year based on today's numbers.
Claiming is an interesting way to put it. Yes.
Yeah, sure. So on the one hand, you've got a very high tax rate. On the other hand, you've got a period of economic prosperity, particularly for the growth of the country. So it does sort of question the belief that we need to have a lower tax rate in order to have economic prosperity.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I'd have to research this a little bit, but I have looked at the tax. There's a lot of literature out there about reducing taxes, and you can see right there around 1920, Woodrow Wilson and his administration, they were lobbying for lower tax rates. And then again, they did it during FDR. They asked for lower tax rates, JFK. And then and John Maynard Keynes. So JFK and Woodrow Wilson. Now, I hesitate to say Democrats because political affiliations, like even 40 or 50 years ago, it seems like a Democrat and Republican are completely, or not completely, but very, very different.
Very true. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But nobody's accusing them of being kind of these conservative or deficit hawk. I don't know, maybe they were, but anyway, they were calling for lower tax rates. And what they found was right after they lowered those tax rates, that tax revenues actually increased drastically.
I'd be interested to see some numbers on that. I'm unfamiliar with that. That would be.
Yeah, we should spend some time. This is an interesting graph. We should go through this together and maybe spend another day on this one. But I just out of curiosity, like we're talking about incentives right now, Brian. If somebody, 5 minutes. Oh,
yeah, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. If somebody were if you were making $1 million and you knew that you could go and work or you could go and invest in something, and whatever income you made, whatever you think your chances of success are, let's say you think you're going to get a 10% return or a 5% return, but on that return, you're going to get taxed 90%.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that make you a lot less likely to invest in that thing that we're talking about? I mean, there's probably a lot going into whatever happened with the economy in 1950, and we can certainly address that. It is interesting how there was high tax rates, and I can tell you some of my thoughts as to why. But just theoretically, if we take a step back and say, man, I can invest. You brought some investment to me. And you're like, hey, Colin, this is a really great investment. Like a good investment to me is you're making around 10%. I'd love to see more, but like if I felt good about 10%, I could feel good about putting my money in. But if I said, well, I could invest $100,000 and I'm hoping to get $10,000 per year, but actually then the government's going to take 90%, so I'll get $1,000 per year. That's really after taxes a 1% return. Like, is it worth risking my money?
Well, then the question then comes up: what do you do with the money? What else do you do with the money? Because
exactly. Let me speak to that a little bit, because one of the reasons that they saw tax revenues increase after lowering the tax rates is because people were doing all sorts of weird things with their money. Incentives and taxes is so important. As you mentioned earlier, people could take their money to another country, or they could invest in tax-free municipal bonds, or they could hide their earnings. There's all sorts of incentives that are created when you put the tax rate, the marginal tax rate, which means, if you make $1 million, it's not like every dollar, once you hit $1 million threshold, that every dollar that you earn is taxed at 90%. It's just every dollar over $1 million is taxed at 90%. And that's important because now you say, well, I've got all this money. Well, maybe I'm not going to risk it. I'll just leave it in the bank and see if I can get an interest rate. Like maybe the interest rates are going to be high enough that, well, you know what, I can put it in a CD, or I can put it in some, there's companies out there that'll give you a guaranteed return at 3% or something like that. Well, that's better than the 1% I'm going to get after the investment where they're going to tax me at 90%. So yeah, there's other places that I can put it, but there's distortions in the economy, right? Because now we're saying, well, I don't want to do this because it's a high tax rate.
What does the bank do with that money if you put it in the bank or you put it in a CD?
Maybe they're giving it to people in mortgages or something like that.
So it's still getting invested in the economy. Whether you're actively doing it or someone else is doing it for you, it's going back into the economy.
Right, but it's not going into businesses that are creating, the same types of jobs. It's going into one small part of the economy. There's a distortion there. Then we can't say, well, hey, listen, I'm going to decide where based on what the return is going to be, I'm going to decide where I'm going to put my money. Oh, I'm going to avoid taxes. We are looking away from a huge number of investments because of the tax treatment of those investments.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are like, well, maybe it's not worth it to try to do some, cool internet thing, or try to take us, to create electric cars or invest in nuclear power or something, because they're saying, well, I'm going to be taxed like crazy if I go and do that. There becomes these distortions in incentives.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is we can argue about the particulars of those distortions or incentives, but there is certainly a distortion, and there is certainly adverse incentives that are going to be created, or different incentives that are going to be created, because the government is saying, oh, I'm going to tax you at high rates. And I have to say something else, Brian. Like, instead of Elon Musk saying, like, let's say he just decides to go and do it. Well, now the government has 90% of his money and not Elon Musk to put it into a business.
Right.
Maybe that's good, maybe it's bad, but I don't know. Like, we're putting a lot to the government.
So we're gonna stop this here. And the next time I'd like to talk about motivation, which is kind of what we're finishing on, that we're going to pick up here. Also, one of your favorite words, unintended consequences. Favorite two words, yeah. Unintended consequences.
Yeah.
So we're going to pick up the next time. Okay, cool. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, bye.
Bye.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.